this is the second day of presentations from postgraduate programs about their engagement with the topic of method and the methods they use to engage with what we can broadly call design research. So, and in the short text that I've done, design research is integral to the whole of the AA community. And from a philosophical perspective, it's a unique form of inquiry that has some correspondence still with Descartes. We often think of Descartes as the founder of a scientific method, and skeptical doubt still persists as a scientific method. But there is much more in his original text that is still of importance for us today. And that is the relation between intuition, deduction, and logic. And those are his words. What we're going to be seeing today are three programs with quite a different set of approaches to yesterday. What emerged yesterday was what was shared was a view of the collective endeavor at a small scale within a studio in team working, at a larger scale within Discourse of similar programs and people engaged in the same set of ideas across the world. And there were other subsidiary themes which we'll also pick up today. So if I can pass it over to landscape urbanism.
Yes. So, well, thank you, Mike. From our side, it will be presenting Elena, who is a seminar tutor in the History and Theory section of the program, and Rashma Susan, who is one of the students of the current cohort. And they will be presenting some examples of how we develop design research within the program.
So thank you, Alfredo. Hello, everyone. So we want to present a bit what's behind the research methods and these inquiries we do, questioning as well the Cartesian ideas. So we will discuss how policy shape landscapes and how designers could have a role in designing those readings. And we will present a few examples of students' work. So this was a bit of our question. Are there any alternative research methods that are not complicit in the destruction of the planet and instead contribute towards the environmental justice and an ecological approach to design architecture knowledge? So in that sense, we will guide through these big three topics. And our departing point, it's the consequential landscapes, our research methods. Which means cities are our main object of inquiry, but opposing to the Cartesian idea of just abstracting big concepts into the minimum form to make it workable, we shift and do the opposite while problematizing what are the metabolics and what are all the schemes that make the possible cities work as they do. And to understand this, we look not only at cities as these small or like these defined units, but we think about it as a planetary urbanization process, where cities and the network of cities are utilizing landscapes to sustain themselves. They provide materials and provide labor. They provide energy, and of course they become the wasteland later of what was produced then, creating like a full system. So following the UN, there are numbers that say that most people will live in cities in the coming years, but we try to question that at ALU to think why are we following this inertia and what it's taking in these reciprocal landscapes to produce this inertia of populating and outgrowing cities. So one idea and one of the references we take is this pollution as colonialism, as why the world itself and the commons as it is here, it's being colonized, and it's being managed by urban systems. And we even delve into the commons of, this is also work from previous generations, where we see the Antarctica, the atmosphere, the oceans as the commons of planetary commons that are also being, are experiencing the consequences of urbanization and the planetary urbanization with everything that has to do with the modifications through temperature rise, etc. And these are the consequential landscapes we're thinking about. So cities can only exist when we produce landscapes that look like this. And these are part of our references to start producing the forms of visualizations that we do in LU. First is the reciprocal landscapes that we mentioned before, where we understand the landscapes to produce the cities, and we understand all the in-betweens to make materials, labor go from one point to the other. And we will later see about the anatomy and eye system. So this is an example, for example, from Jane Hutton's work about how to produce this highland. You have to run a bit of the Amazonas to produce these hardwoods. And in LU, we look into this process by doing these anatomical maps and understand how these hardwoods go from the Amazonas to New York, and then all the residues go to waste.
Yeah, so like she said, when in the program we study how landscapes are impacted by global networks. So we also try to trace historically how the land has evolved and how it has been occupied and how that has changed and led to where we are today. So in these maps, in these maps we trace the deforestation pattern and the land, the increase in occupied land area as per in the American continent. Another thing that we like, globalization is largely driven a lot often by tourism, and this was the case in Canary Islands, where it is known as a large tourist hotspot, but it's also supported by migrants who support the economy of that island in a large sense. So mapping this based on the data that's available shows the stark contrast between where the tourists are coming from and where the migrants are coming from, and how that intersection overlaps in the landscape itself. And how this looks like in the final scale, where we experience that space in the land itself, where the tourists go through one part of the land and the migrants experience it in a very different manner.
So we're going to go into a bit of the tools for the research method. So let's take Alexa and how this is like our departing point, and what it takes to build Alexa, and what are the materials, and what are like the secondary materials that allow us to experience this kind of materials that are inherently close to AI, or some thoughts on smart design, or like smart cities, or smartification at all. So we try to, and this and other students' work, where we do the anatomical map from the materials on the left to the distribution, and later to waste. So all of the every stage of to produce this require tons of energy to do it.
This is the video, I think. So, no, I think the animation we need to click for this one.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So then we also try to work in not only to trace what is like this futuristic approaches to design, but we also understand that this multiscalarly, it not only work within the scales of this item in the planetary, but we also delve in and sit between each one of the stages in which design takes place, because part of our work focuses a lot on policies and how they design landscape. So by understanding each one of these stages, we could find out that to produce the landscapes the way they look at the global scale, there are local implications going through all these layers, and that these policies have worked as a way of palimpsests that have started being designed in the past. Some of them persist over time, some of them are substituted. But to look into how they interact within time and what is relevant for the present, gives us like a big picture of what it actually takes. So this is a way, for example, how we see policies working on a site on public lands in Wales and what it takes to make them different. So when we see from the UK into a small town in Wales, there are like a set of structures that are really, really hard to grasp one single element designing it. So it's like a historical and multiscalar process, and dissecting it's what composes a big part of the work we do here. And to do so, there's other elements that we do. So together we experience the seminar of Histories and Theories, but as a student and a tutor, and we guide these discussions throughout authors and we question what are like not only these aspects of the metabolics that appear on surface, but also like what does it mean, what are the agencies behind deciding what data is available or not, or what are the agencies behind making some forms of visualization. And every time we make a drawing or we make research, there are always some biases that are appearing at each stage, and reflecting upon those makes this work more rich.
Yeah. So when we have our readings during the history and theories, we also try to spatialize it on a cartography of some kind, which may be very crude in its aesthetic, but we trace it historically. We try to understand whatever power dynamics were involved, what was the social and political context in which these maps were made, and how it was studied, to understand how it has evolved to what we see and understand of landscape today.
A bit of these questions on agency, it's also about thinking about who benefits from the creation of this knowledge. So with AI, for example, we understand that just in Silicon Valley, we can, like Google and Microsoft, consume 15.8 billion and 3.6 billion liters of water, and it consumes this 190 kilowatts of energy. That is 120 times more the average annual consumption of a household in Europe in 2020. The centers are estimated to consume almost 1% of the global electricity demand, and at the same time they claim they have been carbon neutral for 12 years. So these are one of the spaces for inquiry that we're trying to see. And here in this video we see a bit of an example of what are like to make Silicon Valley be what it is. So there's these treaties which we were talking about, looking into policies and how these policies started a time ago, but it's still valid while it shouldn't been. So these treaties that was signed by then, it's supposed to be rethought later, and all this water, it's now taken from Mexico to go to feed the industry in Silicon Valley. So all the rural towns in Mexico are suffering, and they have been deployed from the water that should belong to them. And these are like the mechanisms in which they are reinforced to claim. So these are the consequences, and this is what it's feeding AI development in Silicon Valley. And So having gone into these questions, lastly, we want to ask how can we develop alternatives to existing dominant research methods? And I mean, besides the work we have shown, we are also thinking of making horizontal ways of sharing knowledge. For example, these are manuals made with foresters that have been opposing to existing policy frames, and they propose forms in which public woodlands in the UK should be managed, in Wales specifically for now. But the idea is that they want to share this knowledge to maybe create these landscapes not only there but in other public woodlands in the world. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's it. And I mean, these are another ways of sharing knowledge as well, other manuals where we try to make this horizontal way of making this available. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we pass now to SED?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for organizing this. Already I'm quite excited about prospects of collaboration. I think with something like sustainability, one needs to clear the position straight away, and I would like to start by defining what it is for us, that thing which is the name of our program, Sustainable Environmental Design, and what it is, how does it stand in the midst of all other approaches? Well, what it is, it's a set of theories, metrics and tools with which we can create and or modify environmental conditions in buildings and outdoors to promote occupant comfort, health and well-being by means of natural processes involving least dependence on non-renewable sources. I think this is as clear as can be, and the level at which it is applied can be seen to be a much more specific level, let's say in a way from the previous presentation. We're down to the nitty-gritty. And where does the knowledge come from for this thing called sustainable environmental design? It's completely multidisciplinary, and at any moment anybody can make a mixture that combines different disciplines in a different way. But if there is one physics, one discipline that characterizes and is perhaps the most prevalent supporter, it's physics. And as probably most of you know, physics comes in very often with either building physics or building science, or even architectural physics, architectural science consisting of a lot of physics. So theories get converted into tools that are applied to develop practice which provides the test and validation or revision, as the case may be, of both theories and tools. I call this the triangle of knowledge. I mean, that formulation could apply probably to anything that comes into the situation that it calls itself knowledge. But I redrew that, especially for today, to specify it a bit more in relation to research. Can you hear me, by the way? And to include specific topics that become important in the context of sustainable environmental design, for which the word performance has entered the language in a very strong way. Everything is measurable in performance. In our terms, for example, performance might be measurable in degrees centigrade, in CO2 levels, in lux, in kilowatt hours, in pounds, in dollars, and many other. And it can also be measured in qualitative terms Nice, good, very good, exceptional. I made a mental note to interrupt there and not continue telling you about the triangle of knowledge. But if you're interested in any sort of way, there is a paper that I wrote about 10 years ago that appears in this book that introduces it. But what I'd like now to say something about is where our knowledge comes from. By our, I mean ours, the one that we present through our program. And it comes from some very specific sources. For 10 years or so, we were involved as a researcher in the UK National Research Program on solar energy and on energy efficiency in buildings. And these two books were one of the products of that program. Parallel to this, we were involved for something like 15 years in the development of the European projects and research programs in the same area. And then in addition to that, we got involved from the inception of PLE, a network of professionals, in fact originating in the tropical department here at TAA. The network that was first established in 1981 and continues to our days very successfully as an annual platform of discussion and exchange and presentation of ongoing research. And we have from early days involved our own students into it. Here you see 10 of them presenting their first term project, which in SED is studying buildings in London. They're presenting that to an audience of experts in Quebec, Canada. That's, I think, quite important to be able to bring our students and former students into the field, whatever the field is. On the one hand, to share with others, and on the other, to progress and push both their field and ours. Here, that's from the PLE conference of 2014 in Ahmedabad in India, where we presented an exhibition of 12 dissertation projects by Indian students on the program. You can see them listed there. On one of the courtyards of SEPT University in Ahmedabad. And here, the most frightening of all possibilities, an ex-student who had just finished 3 months before this event presenting their dissertation to the experts. I sympathize a lot with this, and I'm really amazed that younger people are so good at it those days. I mean, I suffered myself the terrible sort of nervousness. I mean, I still suffer from that. And so, however, at the end, it is our own research program that we have formulated and are driving, called Refurbishing the City. Improve environmental quality in cities, achieve independence from non-renewable energy sources, develop environmentally sustainable architectures, which for us, of course, have to diversify, not only by building type, but also by climate, urban context. And so, well, that's just to remind me to say that we've had over 500 dissertation projects completed that are located in 150 cities, 60 countries, covering a broad range of climatic regions. What do we do? It is the same methodology, roughly, that we can apply to looking at buildings. And of course, London is our laboratory for this. If we want to be able to have access to the buildings and to the site and map resources on the site, wind and sun and activity, and correlate those with the form, with the urban morphology, eventually going inside the building, looking at patterns and variations that take place as building is occupied and dynamic energy exchanges start taking place. And measuring those, we'll measure those with data loggers over a short period of time that will give us patterns that we can interpret, and we can then try to modify by changing the parameters, the values of building parameters, which of course we can't do in real life straight away, but we can do thanks to simulation tools that we calibrate from the outset based on the measurements. I don't want to spend much time in this. I want to finish by showing an outline of the methodology that we apply to all projects. And I have two of our current students here, Nurul and Marvin, who have been with us from the beginning of the academic year and have been, testing, if you wish, the program and its methodology. So if there is time, Mike, I'd like to call them to tell us a few words about their experience so far with the program and its methods. Marvin? Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Nurul and this is Marvin. So just to give a bit of context, Marvin and I actually have been working for quite a while before joining SED. Probably the first thing that I realized that I really appreciate about SED is the amount of data that we collect and how we begin plotting the data, and then it becomes a lesson in data visualization. You start recognizing patterns and trends, and suddenly after 2 weeks of data logging, you end up with this piece of readable art that carries a lot of empirical values. It carries a lot of information, and you start appreciating those things. And then from a person who has probably spent too much time in practice, the first thing I realized about SED is that they don't look at building standards, green building standards especially, as the definite way of ensuring that your building will perform. We are taught to question these standards, put them to the test. So there's actually a deeper appreciation of the procedures that goes into coming up with what we think is what could be acceptable standards, if that makes sense. Marvin?
To add to what Nurul has said, we started the program and we were discussing how we don't necessarily believe in data-driven design because there's always just a logical and almost instinctive way of designing for people. But as we go deeper into the program, as our professors continuously question our design decisions, we are starting to realize that there really is like an added layer in designing for the future. We really need to bring energy efficiency. We need to make sure that we rely less on mechanical systems. We optimize the building in terms of passive cooling and heating through ventilation and so on. In general, we want to make sure that our buildings rely on mechanical systems, and we inform the design process through an iterative process of testing different shapes, forms, glazing ratios, materiality, and so on. We have this feedback loop of trying, testing, trial and error to inform our final product. And the feedback loop of this SED methodology is what is helping us to design more consciously for the future. So. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, Maria's already there. So the last presentation is from our PhD program.
Thank you so much, Mike, for organizing this really interesting set of events. We were really privileged to be able to be here also yesterday, so it's been even more interesting for myself and for the many candidates who attended both yesterday and today, actually, to see how the debate actually evolves. And I have to make a disclaimer. So my name is Maria Giudici, and I'm just one of the many, in fact, supervisors who work in the PhD program. Is that already there? Oh, that's perfect. Right. So just to give you guys a sense, 10 minutes from this, okay? So, and I'm just one of the many actually supervisors who work in the program. I work a little bit on the coordination of the program, but really this is a program perhaps like no other in the school, because it's really not a kind of canonical hierarchical system. It's more like a constellation of researchers, really. And in fact, actually, many of the people who are here in this room today are part of this project. Of course, Mike, of course, Simos, and of course, other director of studies who belong, in fact, to all the parts, I would say, really, of the graduate school and also of some undergraduate programs. So it's really, again, as I said, a kind of constellation of different researches, and therefore it will be a little bit difficult actually to enter the specifics in 10 minutes, and maybe we shouldn't be doing that precisely because of the variety and diversity of the projects that we welcome in the program. But there are certain things that all of our researchers deal with certain questions, certain challenges, certain methodological conundrums, if you want. Starting from the very first one, those little two letters, PH, so philosophy. At the end of the day, this is a degree in philosophy, really. So it's, if you want, actually the farthest field from architecture that we can imagine. Philosophy is really about actually questioning pretty much anything. There's nothing certain in philosophy, while on the contrary, architecture deals at the end of the day with a certain degree of certainty. If nothing else, we have to build at the end of the day. Also, architecture deals with a certain degree of usefulness, of course, of its product and of problem-solving capacity, if you want, while philosophy, on the contrary, conceives of itself as something that is useless, if you want, to start with, right? And so that's why I wanted actually to start by showing you this picture, because I think it's a picture that shows so many of the problems we are still grappling with, but also some of the possibilities. Possibility number one, well, the thing that I find quite funny in this picture is that it's the School of Athens, actually by Raphael, that is a kind of a compendium of the most important figures of classical philosophy. Quite a few figures are depicted, in fact, with the semblances of Renaissance architects. So from the very beginning, we have almost like this kind of bizarre encounter of philosophy and architecture, or space and speculation, if you want, in the same space. However, there are also some problems with this picture. I think the most obvious one, we are talking about subjects that are broadly homogeneous. They are all male, apart from one person. They are all white. They all belong to the same cultural tradition and also arguably to the same class. Obviously, this might be a slightly anachronistic concept, but what I mean is that they all come from a certain kind of layer of the population that is relatively comfortable. So I would say that a lot of what we have to deal with as PhD candidates is to try to undo that picture of the School of Athens and to try to rethink how do we go beyond that, how do we engage different voices, and how do we put forward a relationship between thinking or philosophy, if you want, and architecture that is radically different from the one of the past. As I already mentioned, there's not one method, but there are many methods. In fact, I would say that the one thing that we all have in common as researchers, as PhD candidates and supervisors, is that we do use those 3 or 4 years that are the commitment that you give to the PhD program as a way to construct the individual method of each candidate. If they do think that the method is valid, because of course being against method is also a perfectly valid position, and some of our candidates do decide to take that position. So we are, again, a team that is pretty broad in terms of expertises, in terms of attitude, in terms of interests, skills, and so on, and forms of knowledge that we try to research, and so on and so forth. And I think that this is actually one of the strengths, in fact, of the program. Obviously, the question whether the lack of one specific direction is a strength or is a weakness can be up for discussion. I do think that in our case, this is a strength, because it really allows each candidate to construct, really, again, their own position or their own methodology. However, this said, so starting from a position that is inherently pluralistic, if you want, or to use a slightly problematic word, Catholic, we do have some things in common, as I mentioned. And I think the things that we do have in common, they all have to do with the idea of questioning. First of all, we all interrogate form as a process. So we all interrogate form, which means that we are all committed to the discussion of the architectural artifact. But of course this happens from very different perspectives that include obviously historical critical research, archival research, like in the case of David's thesis for instance, and design tools and design methods of course. And in all of these different researches, really the architectural form is seen just as the index or the crux of much more complex financial, economic and social processes and environmental processes, right? So I think that you can see that across the board from historical researches to design experiments, this is really a commitment that we all have. We have a commitment to form, we have a commitment to architectural thinking, but we also have a commitment to rethinking the social parameters that are behind that. So the second way in which we interrogate things is that we really try to challenge the separation of theory and practice. And that's why I really love the triangle that Simon showed us earlier, because I think what is beautiful in your program is that there isn't even a separation between the two things. From the beginning, they are embedded one inside the other. I think that the power that that kind of thinking has, unfortunately, has been forgotten by academia in many fields, including especially historical critical fields, and on the contrary, that's what we have to try to recuperate. So this kind of dialogue between theory and design. I just going to show you one example here of a student a couple of years ago who set up a women's association, and this association kind of crystallized a series of pamphlets of the ways in which women in Iran can change their domestic environment. So it's a project that is intensely architectural. It's really all about the manipulation of space, but ultimately it's really a statement on a gender question, really. Or in this case, a student who graduated 2 years ago who devised, in fact, a self-built construction system as a way to offset, of course, all the problems of housing costs actually in London. So the idea that the more we are critical, the more we are theoretical, the more we are also projective somehow. And then also, we've spoken a lot about research, but at the end of the day, this is a school. And so our candidates are also still here to learn, even if they are, of course, quite mature people in most cases. And they are here really to learn how to learn, precisely because most of them are or will be teachers. And I think that this commitment to teaching is absolutely crucial. Some of the best PhD theses that came out of the school in the last few years really belong to people who are now committed and established teachers in schools, such as Elif, for instance. And I think all the processes that our candidates go through are all about actually learning how we can unlearn the tools that we received and how we can relearn them to eventually teach them. These tools have to do with design, they have to do with computation, they have to do also with fields that are, if you want, relatively peripheral to architecture, such as photography, for instance, like in the case of the thesis of Gili Merin, who has been a long-term tutor, in fact, in school as well, the thesis on pilgrimage. And then finally, last but not least, the idea that the last way in which we challenge, in fact, actually our own role is to rethink the tools of design through theory and vice versa. So we use design to destabilize theory, and we use, in fact, actually theory to destabilize design. So this is actually the dissertation of Sayan Cheng, who won, in fact, a RIBA medal a couple of years ago, and it was really a fantastic statement on the development of rurality in recent times in China, in fact. But the whole thesis, in the end, was crystallized in a kind of long scroll type of drawing. So the idea that you can use the tools of drawing or computation and so on and so forth, so tools that we traditionally see in the field of architecture, and we can bring them into the field of philosophy, and vice versa, the other way around. So it's all kind of like really a questioning exercise, interrogating, challenging, learning, and rethinking. I would just now leave the stage to our candidates. Yeah.
So just kind of taking off on where we left yesterday, this idea that knowledge is fugitive, and the idea 2 days away is yet tomorrow will be yesterday. And for us, that is knowledge. We aren't able to grasp it in such a way, but instead we need to be critical researchers, the key word being critical, and find our position within this wide range of academia. So it's kind of one step further to what we were saying yesterday, this idea of being published. And we have to place ourselves within not 5 resources, but hundreds of resources to understand the fashion of the research over the last 100 years, or for some of us it's thousands of years. And kind of understanding how do we fit into that. And unfortunately, as that progresses, which we discussed yesterday, you actually get less confident and you get much, not dumber, but when you see how much there is out there, you place yourself, you become very small. Yeah. And it's very different to the 5 years or 7 years of education that a lot of us have had, where we're really putting our ideas forward. Here we're burying ourselves in everybody else's research, understanding being malleable in what our approach is, and then that's how we test. So essentially we test against historical research that's happened, and then we start to place ourselves in the research. So it's a much longer process. I mean, some would argue years, maybe 1 year, 6 months, but it's a lot longer than just kind of doing a project in a semester and kind of wiping it all out. So that's how we test, or one way that we test in our PhD program.
Yeah, and for us to do a PhD program is also to question the canonical discourse, to introspect about the form of knowledge we received, and also to challenge the authoritative sources. PhD research is like an archaeology of knowledge with highly critical thinking. As Foucault said, it is not in order to give it a definitive place in an unmoving constellation, but in order to review with the archive the discursive formations, the positivities, the statements, and their conditions of formation, a specific domain, a domain that has not so far been made the object of an analysis, but a domain that has no means of guaranteeing that it will remain stable and autonomous. So we are reflecting on the current issues by going back to history, striving to find those subjects merged by authority, and exploring architectural history, theories, and design methods. We are starting a conversation in the architectural discourse and producing new knowledge through different approaches. We PhD candidates attend to those muted voices in the history and be aware of the audience we are talking with. The PhD program is an incredible platform to explore different subjects, empower different voices, seeing things through different lenses, and explore them from different perspectives. That is a significant purpose for us to do PhD at the AA.
So how can we think our collective role? I mean, I think it's kind of a lot of people that has been engaged in the PhD know that it is a lonely process, but it is a truly lonely piece of work. We have to embrace it. We have to celebrate it, because basically it's the only act of autonomous and independent individual statement that we have to gain, I mean, in the architectural realm. But of course it can only be done through the collaboration, exchange, debate that we have all together. Because we all know that knowledge kind of thrives when it's actually exchanged. So we do also produce seminars, symposium, lecture, and we just come back from one, actually. And this is how we actually build our knowledge together. So this sense of collectivity is actually the question of how we build our relevance, not only as a single person, but as people who actually talk about architecture. And the last question is, of course, one of the most important, because it relates to the question that Maria asked yesterday, so we kind of have to answer now. So how can our work actually matter in this sense of philosophical field that is kind of asking questions of how can we be useful? Is this useless field? If I can quote Maria. And to reply, as the statement that was made yesterday and talk a little bit by Ruby, is that we are addressing not only tomorrow and yesterday, but the multiple forms of yesterday to actually embody what can be tomorrow in this very long sense of tomorrow and the future. So we do have to understand that, and we do also have to find answers, but not only answer, but ask the good questions. We are all making an investigation that we don't know how it's going to unfold, but we are all in a way here to make an impact and be relevant, not only in the field of academia. Good.
Okay, thank you Thank you to all three programs. I think what we saw initially with the first group was their techniques and methods for mapping the global ecological context within which architecture is situated, and also its social impact on that scale. And with SED, the explicit methodology and the affection for physics, which I share, but from a very different kind of physics. And I think from the last group, also very inspiring to see a kind of response to some of the questions that emerged yesterday, that knowledge is fugitive and that tomorrow will very rapidly become yesterday. And I think that was one of the kind of big conclusions. You've also addressed in your group that knowledge, the field of knowledge is not stable. And what I think all three groups share, and what I hope the whole of the AA shares, is that we want to reconfigure and reconstitute what is relevant knowledge for society today. And I think what also comes across is a kind of shared faith that architecture can do this, both as individuals, but more significantly as a collective. So the first question I'd like you to reflect on, and we'll ask you, each of the teams, to respond to, the concept of nature has changed radically in the last few years. It's been a slow transition up until around 1950, and then since then increasingly rapid. And yesterday's discussion highlighted a few aspects of it. But the knowledge of nature is both unstable, and our knowledge of it is unstable. So trying to situate ourselves in, let's say, a whole set of fields that are in themselves unstable and uncertain requires us to be able to deal with uncertainty. And I would like to, I'm going to pick at random. I would like to start with you if I can. How can we proceed with the methods and techniques that we've learned, at the same time acknowledging that they will quite soon be redundant and replaced by something else, and the field in which we work is inherently unstable? In your case, politics will change, governments will change, knowledge of what we call the natural world is increasingly a human world. Nature itself is not constrained. Would you like to pick up on that?
Yeah, sure. So there are some ways in which, so one of the first approaches that we have is that like a historical study of our cases and of our work. It's crucial to kind of address this issue, because there are some, for example, like if we go into the concept of nature, just like, and alluding again this Cartesian idea that brought us here together, before this moment in time where nature was defined by Descartes, nature became something more of an instrumentalized form of relationship that was before. So sometimes some of the way people related to nature from before that, it's not accessible to us. But it is some remnants of paintings or of forms of representing that are a crucial part of our studies now. So just that by understanding this, going through all these episodes and the shifts, we might not be able to foresee the specific form in which nature will behave in the future, but we do see what are the changes, like what happens when some agencies are acting upon these ways, or what happens when they stop acting in some other ways. And we always see that there are changes that are not just linear, that they're like, as we say, we work a lot with this concept of the palimpsestic, where there are some things that that forms of knowledge or forms of understanding or forms of representing that can come from centuries ago, and they can still be valid, but there are some small shifts, but that they don't totally displace what was before. There are subtle ways in the layers that compose what we understand. So in this like dialectics in between all these parties and what is persistent. For example, we see that in Wales it was persistent that the people wanted to survive, and that's very hard to change. And there's a lot of people that want to survive. There's a lot of people that don't want to give up their water. They just want to drink water. They want to exist. There are some things that are immanent, and when we sit and reflect on these warnings about what we should care about, we see that there's like a prevalence of those ideas and those concepts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that this is really a wonderful question because it picks up on many of the things that we discussed in the seminar this morning, in fact. And I think that for us there are maybe actually, us, of course, I'm speaking on behalf of the group, but so, correct me if I'm misinterpreting. I think that there are two things that I would say. On the one hand, I think that what historical and critical research can really learn from scientific investigation is this constant ability to destabilize itself, right? And to never take anything for granted. And I think from that point of view that really three key, almost like objectives that I would say any PhD candidate has to have are to denaturalize that which is naturalized, so all the concepts that are pre-received, to defamiliarize, in fact, anything that we think that is familiar, and to estrange. Because it's only really by, questioning even the things that we are sure we know that we can really, in fact, question reality. So I think the idea of questioning the idea, the image of nature for us is absolutely crucial and fundamental because it's been such a powerful figure through which, in fact, many of the asymmetries that we still live today, such as gender asymmetries or racism, have been really constructed on the idea of naturalizing concepts that are not at all natural, right? So I think that would be the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer is much more pragmatic, and it's actually how do we act in a field that is ever-changing as any other field. And I think that here we have a very powerful instrument as PhD candidates, that is the thesis. The thesis is one position. It never assumes to be the totality of all the knowledge of humankind. It's always historically placed. It's very limited. It also sets itself up. It sets itself up for being something that can be invalidated, let's say, or can be revealed as not functional by the end. That's why we have a defense or a viva at the end. So I think the thesis model to me is a kind of meta-methodology, if you want, because you have to put forward one statement. It means that it's like your statement. It doesn't mean that it's the totality of the truth, let's say. So I think that from that point of view, a PhD research is already set up to be something that is very limited in a way, in a positive sense, I would say. Not so when you go outside of the PhD research, so when you do research in general, right? Because the temptation there might be to essentialize the research that you are doing, thinking that you are covering everything. But I think what was good for me as a PhD candidate, and what I really appreciate in the work that our researchers do, is that the thesis is always limited. It's always a specific moment in time, it has a duration, it has a limitation, it has a field, it doesn't go outside of that, which means that it's a monad in this kind of ever-changing field that is always placed in a very contingent situation. So its very limitation, I think, is a power from this point of view, or let's say, makes it valid even beyond its validity, if that makes sense.
I think my answer is a bit short. We do deal with simulations of future weather files. We are able to see what the climate would potentially be like in decades to come. But I think the easiest answer for me is that if I could borrow a few words from our SED friend Klaus, we are in an age of smart buildings, if we're talking about buildings. They respond very well. We teach them how to respond. But the one thing that I think we keep forgetting is that these buildings are also built for smart people. So I think we should always remember to provide opportunities for adaptive behavior when things start changing in ways that we could never imagine in the future.
To quickly add, there's historical data with temperatures and so on. So with trends and patterns in temperature levels, we can try to predict and future-proof our buildings. We want to come up with something that works in the present, but can sort of still adapt to the future.
Do you want to add anything to that, Sumas? Good answers, I think. Okay, thank you. I admire your faith, and I'm a little more skeptical. And in my worst moments, I think I have doubt of the sustainability of humans, not our ability to design things. So one of the things that's very rarely discussed politically, theoretically, and in architectural discourse are the worst outcomes. This is very clear in the politics of climate science, that more or less discussions and many papers are focused on what can we do and how can we tread more lightly on the earth, and that's great. And very little, I've just seen one or two recently, that say, what if we are facing catastrophic changes? And I think architecture, until it at least has some part of its discourse in the collapse of societies, is not really doing its full work. And if history teaches us anything, and I sort of agree with Maria's position that I wouldn't quite say there are eternal verities, but there are things in history that re-emerge, that are reconfigured, we describe them differently and we rematch them to our understanding in the contemporary world. If there is anything in the truth in that, is that society has collapsed many times in the past, and it has re-emerged, and we ought to be looking at that. However, that's just my particular position, and I'm not asking you to do that. I think I would like to open to any of the students or attendees if they would like to ask questions of the people who presented today.
Thank you for your presentation. Just going to ask this question from 3 programs, and I wish I could ask this from the programs yesterday. The triangle that Simos presented was very interesting, theory, tools, and practice, and the constant feedback between them 3. I'm just very curious to see how this triangle can be expanded across different programs. What is shared, and I'm pretty sure that everyone, we are all aware that we have a lot of shared methods of doing things, and how this triangle, from what edge practically we can share this amongst different programs. Maybe we can start from like today's program, and then I would like to know your opinion about like in what aspect, the tools or the practice, or even the knowledge, because we are all individually in our program, we're exploring very interesting topics, and it would be interesting to somehow see these triangles come together and become like a bigger triangle, like irregular shape, with like a much more interconnected nodes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I think the way I've introduced, of course, it was so fast, but it's possible to see immediately that the words, theories, tools, and practice are universal, and therefore you can have any particular research program in your head, and look at these as being relevant. But of course, the contents of each of these will be different. Yeah. The content of theories, the particular theories, the principles that can be converted into tools, the particular tools that result, and the way in which they are used for the practice. So starting therefore with 3 universal wordings, we can be as specific as need be, so that on the one hand, different programs can talk to each other, and on the other, each program have specific it might be or general, can done into its own business. And so I was saying that one version that I showed you, I drew especially for today, because I thought that it included more notions of research that might be more universal and therefore again applied. So that's all I can say. In fact, if there is any interest, then well, we can talk or we can share. Yeah.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to pick up on that? I have one last question which I'd like to ask to the PhD group, who've been very responsive today and to the debate. And I think one of the things that I think it was you that mentioned that we do our research as individuals, but we acknowledge and want to be part of a collective. And there are difficulties in that, both on how we operate as individuals doing research, but also as a school or as a collective of programs that are trying to constitute and formalize a body of knowledge that comes from research.
I think maybe this is something for the candidates who are going through that.
Which one would you nominate? They're all pointing at you.
Okay. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
More volume.
Exactly. Yes. So.
The dichotomy of the individual and the collective.
Exactly. Because I think that, I mean, first of all, as individuals can be the first way to kind of make this connection. So, in other words, perhaps even solidarity with each other in the program and so on, without the knowledge, let's say, before integrating these discussions that they can exist between the research method and the knowledge that everyone may be investigating on their own. But on the other hand, I also think that, and this is happening actually quite a lot more recently, like spaces of debate and spaces where things can be put on the table to even just question why this is your position or where is your line of thought coming from and where mine may be. And whilst this on the one hand might come across confrontational, I also think that it's a space where people actually can forge links, no? with each other and in their research as well, and also in finding maybe unexpected alliances that may, from which we actually, most importantly, we learn. I mean that perhaps that may be one answer.
I think what I love about that remark is the L-base. But there's something very intriguing about that collaboration also... Yeah, collaboration also means being brave enough to say, I don't agree with you.
Yeah, right? And it's a positive thing.
So I guess this is the most important question, at least for me, in my PhD study. At first it was very confused for me, because why do we need to establish a program? Because it's essentially your own writing work and it's inherently by yourself. But then at a certain point I feel like who you are writing for is an important question to answer. As long as you put that question in mind, then it becomes a collaborative work, because you want to write for the broadest audience possible in all your designated. You want to reach out a certain range of designated audience. You want to attract them in the best way that you can. And so I guess, like, in a certain sense, it's how your work is valued, right? The most the biggest range of person that you can attract or you can solicit their interest, the more valuable your work will be. So I guess for me, that's why essentially, ultimately, PhD work is a collaborative work. You need to involve your audience in order to have your work's value unearthed or uncovered. And by doing this, you find yourself's value in academic realm and discipline and beyond that. So I guess that's, for me, it's even an ethical dimension of my work. And it's collaborative, inherently collaborative. So that's my opinion on this question.
Just one very quick thing. Can we think about a collaborative PhD in which more than one person works on the same thesis? I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know myself. I don't have an answer, because I think from the point of view of the production of knowledge, I think we can totally think about that. What I am not so sure is the degree to which actually the PhD is also this construction of oneself as a researcher and as a teacher, and that is as any part of our own lives, is something that we walk alone, right? But I do think we could think about other models in which, in fact, actually research can be done collectively, and then even the thesis itself can be a collective.
Yeah, it's done in other disciplines, particularly in medicine and physics. And Simos, like me, shares a love of physics. Mine is physics of complexity science. It's always done in teams. I think that also applies to the studio culture of the master's programs, and in a way also perhaps to the units. There is a kind of way of positioning yourself in a year-long or 3-year-long individual research that's part of a longer research program for the unit or the program set of objectives. But I like very much the last student's answer, the struggle to find yourself and position yourself. I remember my mentor telling me, if you don't write for other people, the only person who'll ever read every word is you. And your tutor will read most of it, and your mum might read a bit. And no one else is ever going to read it. So we want to be authors. We want to be ourselves in all the work we do. But we're doing work for other people and with other people. And I think that's both a dichotomy and a delight for us as architects. So I'm going to leave you with that and pick up that conversation tomorrow. Thank you all very much for today.